Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me again on GBN Originals. My guest today is my good friend and fellow podcaster, Canadian investigative journalist David Krayden. It's always good to see you there, David. Thank you for making time for me once again.
Always a pleasure to see you, Neil.
I think anyone paying attention to Canada, and I know a lot of us on this side of the Atlantic very much are, Canada has always been held in great affection by many of us. And we watch the trials and tribulations there, with rapt attention. News reaches us now of a snap election. Mark Carney, obviously, is to the fore. Can you bring us up to date with your response to the latest events in your homeland?
Well, that was a perfect question because Mark Carney is very much a part of the other side of the Atlantic. That's what makes it so funny. Mark Carney recently described Canadians as Europeans. Not quite sure how that works geographically. We're probably a little more European than the United States, but Mark Carney is a globalist. And you could just see this coming like a gathering storm. Not to be too Churchillian, but you could see Mark Carney on the horizon for literally years, coming here to replace Justin Trudeau. And you knew it was going to happen sooner or later. And it was a question of how low Justin Trudeau's popularity would have to go until he pulled the plug and Mark Carney came in. And it's quite interesting because you see pictures of the two of them in the week that Justin Trudeau announced his resignation, that he would resign as soon as a new leader was selected. And they're embracing each other, chatting it up in the Prime Minister's office. Somebody leaked these photos out. And it's quite interesting because obviously it's like Mark Carney was promised something. I think he was promised the leadership of the Liberal Party. And that's what he got. And it's astounding because he won the leadership of the Liberal Party with 86% of the vote, including the ridings of his opponents. And my friend Ezra Levant from Rebel News went through every constituency across the country and found that even in, say, Chrystia Freeland's riding, who was running against Mark Carney won 86% of the votes in that riding. Is Chrystia Freeland that unpopular in her own riding? The same with his other opponent. Well, there's only really one other opponent. They got rid of anybody else who might pose some danger to Mark Carney. They were booted from the race for foreign influence or financial reasons. And so everybody knew this was a coronation, that Mark Carney was going to win this, and he was going to win it in a huge way. But just before the vote took place, just over about 2 weeks ago now, 2/3 of the Liberal members were disqualified from voting. I mean, this is something from Lyndon Johnson.
Why? What disqualified that 2/3 from taking part in such an important?
We never found out. It was, and people have sort of asked Mark Carney if you're allowed to ask a question like that around him. And of course, only friendly media are allowed around Mark Carney. I would never get within 100 meters of Mark Carney. He won't answer that question. He says, well, that was decided by the leadership of the Liberal Party, of which I'm not part of. And I really can't comment on that because I'm not quite certain what happened. I had nothing to do with it, though. And it gets even better, though. As soon as one of the people I say he, but the party disqualified was an Ottawa area member of Parliament, an Indo-Canadian, which of course the Trudeau government, they're really at war with Indo-Canadians in India itself right now. He was disqualified from running in the leadership campaign, supposedly for financial reasons or foreign interference. And as soon as Mark Carney became prime minister, and as you know, in the Westminster system, even if you don't have a seat in the House of Commons, you become prime minister if you lead the party that has the majority in the House of Commons. So when he became prime minister, he announced he was going to run in this guy's seat in Ottawa, even though he'd already been nominated to run. And once again, it's Chandra Arya. It was his name. Is his name. And he announced he'd be running in Aria's riding of Nepean, which is a suburban area in Ottawa. And he decided that he had been disqualified as a nominee for the Liberal Party. And once again, Carney had no idea why this happened, but he'd be running in that seat. So there could be some poetic justice in this because the Conservatives have a strong candidate in that seat of Nepean, and the existing MP who was denied the Liberal nomination is running as an independent. So it might split the vote sufficiently to defeat Mark Carney. I'm hoping it does.
There's something going on, certainly on your side of the Atlantic, which it has overtones of the old Soviet era. I'm thinking about Kamala Harris and the way that she was just offered up as the coronated, this is your choice, this is your Democrat in the US elections. And then you say that, 86% of 1/3 of the membership of the Liberal Party effective or coronated Mark Carney. And there's all that kind of elitist feel about it, as though more and more in the very homes of so-called liberal democracy, it's becoming apparent that the people, the proletariat, do not matter. And it's just about telling the rank and file how it's going to be because we know better and you will just have to take what you're given.
Well, it's precisely it. I felt like when Mark Carney became prime minister, was installed as prime minister, it was like Khrushchev replacing Stalin. Suddenly we have a new leader. And by the way, he will be ratified in a general election and he'll probably get 99% of the vote because it's a rigged election. But that's exactly how it feels. It's like suddenly we have a leader installed, except it's not the Communist Party of the Soviet Union that's installing him. It's the World Economic Forum and the United Nations and all of these globalists who control Canadian politics. And Justin Trudeau was there for 9.5 years, basically. 9.5 years of economic catastrophe. Mark Carney was a senior advisor throughout most of those years. So he was very much a part of that administration, although he calls himself without any credulity as a outsider. He says that with a straight face.
He has even in so many words spoken of his intention to undermine, destroy the energy industry and the Albertan energy industry, hasn't he? I mean, he's been that explicit in the past.
He has, and his net zero policies are completely destructive. They limit the growth of the fossil fuel industry, of the energy sector in Canada, which is probably foundational to our economic success in this country. Take out the fossil fuel industry, take out the energy sector, the oil and gas energy sector from Canada, and we are going to be absolutely decimated. But of course, the globalists don't care about that. That's the point. They want to destroy the economy here. I recently talked to your former Prime Minister, Liz Truss, about Mark Carney, and she knew Mark Carney well, of course, because he was the governor of the Bank of England at the same time. And she said he was responsible for nothing but the printing of money, higher taxes. And she said if Canadians go for this man, it's going to mean an even more ardent economic catastrophe for Canada, because I mean, as far as she was concerned, Mark Carney was a complete incompetent in terms of managing the Bank of England. And I've heard recently on fairly good authority that the Bank of England is potentially on the verge of collapse, which I think would begin with the Mark Carney administration.
When it comes to the snap election, what's your prediction? I mean, for all that you're saying about Mark Carney, loud and clear, what would you foresee?
I think it's going to be a slim Conservative majority. And unlike the UK right now, the Conservative Party of Canada is a little farther to the right, a little more commonsensical. I'm not always happy with it. I don't like their stand on Ukraine. I think they're echoing a lot of Justin Trudeau and Mark Carney's positions, but they're a heck of a lot better in terms of not wanting to impose net zero policies on the country, wanting to reduce taxes. Pierre Poilievre yesterday talked about a 15% middle class tax cut, which is substantive, which is real. And Poilievre is not one who gravitates towards, oh, it's a crisis. Let's exploit the crisis to tax people some more and to give out more government stipends. He's not looking at the current trade crisis with the United States as another COVID crisis, which Mark Carney is. He can't wait to start issuing those government checks because, oh, people are going to be affected by the tariffs, so we're going to have to intervene. So I would say we're better off in this country with a conservative government than, say, you would have been with a conservative government. I know it's a uniparty there. Some people say it's a uniparty in Canada. I don't think that's quite fair. I have my issues with the Conservative Party, but I'd much rather see them win this election. I think they'll do it narrowly, only because Poilievre's a younger man. He's used to campaigning. Mark Carney has never campaigned in his life. He's never run for public office anywhere. He's been appointed to every position he ever had. And even a 5-week election campaign, it was as short as they can make it. Well, I think will be so taxing to him and so difficult. And I think so revealing to Canadians about what this man really stands for. And I tell you, it's not because the mainstream media is revealing it. It's because people like you and I are out there on podcasts with the independent media and the new media revealing what this guy has done in the past and what he said. This is a man who has written about his admiration for Karl Marx and Vladimir Lenin. He has described these people as the inspirational political leaders of his life. Now, I would call that a Marxist-Leninist. That's what we used to call it. But somehow Mark Carney can point to these two communists and be absolved of any blame. Well, that's Mark Carney. He's such a thinker, and he reads avidly. That's where Mark Carney comes from.
When it comes to sort of bigger picture philosophizing, David, you know, you talk about you've used the word more than once. You know, it's a narrow victory that you would predict for the Canadian Conservatives. Why only slim? You know, and I set that against the context of, you know, here in the UK, you know, where I'm broadcasting from, you know, that Keir Starmer was able to, but by whatever means and by whatever you call a majority, you know, was able to get into power in the United Kingdom. And we also look on, obviously, at what happens in Australia, what happens in New Zealand. What is it about such just a minority, as you're predicting, of the Canadian population would still have any time for someone saying what Mark Carney is saying? Why are we not getting to the point where these characters are swept away in a torrent of opposition to their policies?
Us blokes hate talking about a little thinning up top, and many of us settle with that balding look, but that wasn't for me, and that's why I went to Elite Hair, the world's leading hair loss clinic, and now I've had over 4,000 new hairs added to this barnet, and very soon I'm going to be rocking some brand new flowing locks. And you can too! So how does it work? Step 1, I sent the team a set of photos of my head. Step 2, I then spoke to one of the Elite Hair staff who looked through my photo submissions and worked out a treatment plan for me. Step 3, Elite Hair then organised accommodation and the treatment. I was at their state-of-the-art treatment centre in Istanbul, and their incredibly kind staff took me through the process, and before I knew it, I was in surgery. Elite Hair and their leading medical experts have specialised in pain-free treatments using the sleep deep method, and they really mean that. I felt incredibly relaxed the whole time, and I haven't felt any pain since. Check out Elite Hair using the link in the description. When you do, Elite Hair will provide you with a free personalised hair analysis. Then you'll join over 100,000 happy patients. Hit that link and start your hair growth journey like I did today.
I think a lot of people are still watching CBC in this country, which is the equivalent of BBC in yours, where there's a narrative, a consistent narrative that this man represents change. And Mark Carney is, I must say, he is a political chameleon. We already had an actor as prime minister for over 9 years named Justin Trudeau. It looks like we potentially have another one right now. This man is very good at inhabiting the political bodies of other people. He's passing himself off as not just an agent of change, which is ludicrous, but now as a moderate, as somebody who's just like the Conservative Party, but a little more compassionate. And now why people are falling for that, and whether or not the polling is reflective of what happened in the United States, where Kamala Harris had won that election up until November 5th. The polling consistently put Kamala Harris ahead of Donald Trump, except independent Republican polling. She was supposed to win all the swing states. And not only that, she was getting huge crowds at her rallies, which of course we now know were AI produced. And the same thing has happened in Mark Carney rallies. A lot of these crowds have been artificial intelligence enhanced. So the crowds are sometimes twice as large as they really were, which I think happened with Kamala Harris. Certainly, if you go to a Carney rally, they are fairly morbid affairs, and there's very little actual visceral enthusiasm for this man. When you see him in person, when you hear him speak, one of the worst public speakers I've ever heard. And I've heard quite a few great ones over the years, and I've heard some bad ones. But he is one of the lousiest public speakers ever heard. And he uses the same speech time after time, every night, wherever he goes. It's the same speech. And his responses to questions are exactly the same, whether or not they have anything to do, whether or not they're pertinent to the question or not. He will repeat the same answers over and over again. The mainstream media in this country is sold out to Mark Carney. And of course, you wonder why? Well, because the Trudeau government gave them huge subsidies. The CBC gets $1.3 billion a year to operate. But all of the other mainstream media are also subsidized to a huge degree now by the federal government. Now, Poilievre has promised to eliminate those subsidies and sell the CBC, privatize the CBC. That has scared the hell out of a lot of mainstream journalists, media outlets, and media outlets. And of course, they're right on side with Mark Carney, not asking the hard questions. They're all softball questions. But why this is even working at all with Canadian people, I have no idea. Because it's, I think the other reason, though, Neil, is that they are running not against Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives. They are running against Donald Trump. And that is having a huge effect on voting intentions in this country. And I said that as soon as Justin Trudeau went down to Mar-a-Lago in November and interrupted Donald Trump's Thanksgiving dinner in a very famous scene. He was uninvited, not supposed, and of course there was no place for him to stay that night. But as soon as he did that, I said, he wants a trade war with Donald Trump. He wants these tariffs because that's the only hope the Liberal Party has of not facing extinction and possibly becoming the government again. If they run against this demonized Donald Trump, that's who they're running against, and that might account for it.
How do you feel now? How do you think Canada feels now about Donald Trump? You know, I watched his victory and thought, well, at least he's not Kamala Harris, and that was about as far as I was prepared to go. In terms of my sort of visceral response to Donald Trump, and now some months into his presidency, the way things are playing out in his, the way that his approach to Ukraine, his approach to Israel's activities in Gaza. I become myself more and more skeptical about the manifest reality of Trump 2.0. How are you and how do you think your fellow Canadians are looking on at the reality of the second Donald Trump presidency so far? Well,
I'll tell you, Neil, if I'm having my doubts, and I'm a huge Donald Trump fan, and from 2016 onward, I wrote extensively about how Donald Trump was on the right track. I'm very concerned about where he is right now on several issues. Gaza, one of them, Ukraine, another. I don't think he's realistic about this. He needs to stop the funding, stop the war now, and stop meandering around the corners. I love what he's doing with the Department of Government Efficiency. I like what he's doing with deporting illegal immigrants. I like what he's doing with defeating woke politics. But he's crazy with these tariffs. This is absolute insanity. This is going to lead to a global depression if this continues. It happened like this in the 1930s. Protectionism is a disease. And I cannot support him on this. And he's destroying whatever credibility he had in Canada by constantly referring to us as the 51st state and Governor Trudeau, and now it's Governor Carney. I mean, it just is so incredibly sad to me, though, because I thought we had a chance here to piggyback off this Trump victory in November, to use this as an example of what can happen in Canada. We can come down against these woke policies, DEI and critical race theory. We can stamp out the government waste. We can stop the foreign wars, stop spending money on Ukraine, and bring peace and not war to the world. And he's completely obliterated a lot of that goodwill. And like I say, if I'm angry at Donald Trump right now over the tariffs and over the constant loose talk, you can bet most Canadians who didn't like Donald Trump to begin with are not very happy with him right now. So, consequently, Pierre Poilievre has distanced himself so much from Donald Trump is that, the tough talk every day of we're going to get tough with Trump. He feels he needs to do that because the Liberals are running against Donald Trump. And they're insistent that unless they retain power, Donald Trump's going to take over Canada. Donald Trump is going to impose huge tariffs. Well, Donald Trump will impose huge tariffs whether the Liberals are there or not. I mean, we cannot go toe-to-toe with the most powerful economy in the world. But as an election talking point, it's extremely effective. And that's why I say I think most Canadians do see this election as Donald Trump versus Canada. And it's a question of, well, are the Liberals better suited? Is Mark Carney? After all, he was the governor of the Bank of England. He's used to standing up to these global figures. Maybe he could do it for us. So I think it comes down to that. Because I tell you, when the day Justin Trudeau resigned or announced his resignation, it was a long departure, but that was January 6th. He said, I plan to resign as soon as there's a new Liberal leader. The Liberals were riding about 26% in the polls, 26%. And Poilievre was about 46, 47% in the polls, going for the largest majority in Canadian history, outstripping John Diefenbaker in 1958 and Brian Mulroney in 1984. Now the Liberals, I saw an Angus Reid poll yesterday, and it's not reversed, but the Liberals are now at 46% in this poll, and the Conservatives at 38%, which puts the Liberals in a majority territory. And the only good thing about this is that the third party socialists, the NDP, are being completely obliterated from the picture. They're down to single digits now. So it's interesting. And I think what might happen, you asked me, in terms of the results of this, I guess you could say if there's a second conservative party in this country, it would be the People's Party of Canada, which is essentially libertarian. And their ideology, in terms of their ideology, they're extremely purist. But they could actually pick up a few seats if the conservative vote crumbles any further. But they're not in a position to create the sort of majority that Keir Starmer got because Reform Party split the vote in so many places. They're really not in a position to do that.
Do you think the soul of the Canada that you love prevails and persists? I ask that because here in Britain, I if I was asked the same question about the soul of Britain, I would have to say I really don't know, and I possibly don't think so. Yeah, I feel that the controlled demolition that has been inflicted upon the Britain I grew up in may have passed the point of no return. Certainly for generations, if it could ever be resurrected. And I wonder, because there's so much kindred, there's so much cross-ocean love for Canada, and a lot of us feel so many connections to Canada and things Canadian. Is the Canadian flame still alive, as you care for it?
It's hard to say, because we have become so infected with globalism in this country, so influenced by these globalist designs and intentions and objectives, that I don't know anymore. And what disturbs me most, Neil, I'll tell you this, and really gets into more transcendent politics. One of the American presidents who most inspired me as a youth was Ronald Reagan. And Reagan, of course, had his faults like every other president, but nobody inspired me more when he spoke than Ronald Reagan. From his earliest days, when I used to watch his speeches, when he spoke at Goldwater's victory in 1964, or his Republican nominee victory in 1964, onwards. And Reagan always spoke about the shining city on the hill, and about America being a bastion of freedom. And he really believed that America was different. And I saw in Donald Trump the last best hope of resurrecting that philosophical ideal. And there hasn't been a Canadian leader for me in my lifetime, anyway, that's ever inspired me to the same degree as Reagan did. And I thought with Trump, perhaps we can have a leader who can inspire not just Americans, but Canadians as well, to do likewise. And it's all just unraveling. It's all falling apart. And I can't tell you how disappointed that makes me, because I was hoping for so much more with Trump's victory. I thought it would have a domino effect on Canada. I thought Canada as well would get back to common sense. And the funny thing is, Pierre Poilievre talks like Ronald Reagan at times. At his best moments, he talks about Canadians living in safe communities, having good jobs, working for their families, creating prosperity for everybody, having freedom of speech and the ability to speak our minds. And that to me was what I wanted to see in this election. And what I'm seeing right now is that it's all about this trade war with the United States and that orange demon Donald Trump, and how are we going to stop him from taking over Canada. And every time I say, Donald Trump, do something better, please, he comes back with something even worse. And he just, last week, he endorsed Mark Carney. Now, whether or not he thinks that's going to help Pierre Poilievre or not, I don't know. I don't think so, because I don't think he gives a damn if he helps Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party in Canada. But it disappointed again a lot of people in Canada. But is that all? He just wants to take the country over, and he wants the weakest vassal there to do that. And so it's been very disappointing. And all I do is continue to say that if we can't get people excited about ideas, if we can't get people excited about what this country can be again, or can be in the future, then politics has become a very dismal state of affairs. And that's what this election feels like. I mean, I'm not feeling a sense of huge optimism.
Do you think, though, that is the dry tinder there, awaiting ignition? Is it just for want of a spark? Is there a fire ready, or not?
I certainly hear that. I see that. And when I read the comments on my broadcast every day, I see that reflected. I don't know how widespread that is, how far gone we are on this road. It's very difficult to say. I do think it's possible to save this election from where the liberals and the globals want it to go. And I think that's only going to happen if the Conservative Party sticks to the positive conservative that Reagan and others have always enunciated over the years, articulated over the years, and not get drawn into this anti-American thing. That this election is all about how much we fear the Americans, how much we're not like the Americans, because that is a dangerous place to be in politics when we simply define ourselves as what we're not and define ourselves as who we don't like instead of who we want to be, who we are, and what we can be. And that's the discourse we need more of in this election. The election is early. We're just 1 week into it on Sunday. So we have 4 more weeks. And I think that's 4 more weeks sufficiently to readjust where this is right now and for the light to shine on Mark Carney's nether areas, which are, as far as I'm concerned, abominable, absolutely hypocritical. And in some cases, I think this should be subject to investigation, if not legal investigation, if not ethical investigation. This man has clearly been very close to influence peddling, if not crossing the line, and that's the sort of thing that is being reported to some degree, but not largely enough, and people are not reacting sufficiently to it.
David Krayden, I think your air of uncertainty and your air of caution is wholly opposite. I think it's the only sensible and sane position to hold at this moment. I'd very much intend to catch up with you as this election proceeds and reaches its conclusion. But for today, for your time, thank you very much, David Krayden.
Well, it's always a pleasure talking to you, Neil, and we'll have you on my show in the next couple of weeks.
Brilliant. Lovely. Thank you, David.